Proportionally, the largest penis is the barnacle's, measuring 8 times its body length.
This is Exploring Unusual Sex, the podcast about odd stuff that helps understanding everyday matters. Our host today, from Milan, Italy, is author, journalist and personal coach Ayzad.
Welcome! In this episode we talk about mysterious diplomats, dick-saving firefighters, self-evident truths, trained molesters and much more. Let's get started, and the first topic is Orientalism. In the infinitely varied history of human sexuality, there is just one constant fact. In every culture, nation and age, everyone has always been sure that people fucked much better somewhere else. It is something ridiculous we still see today, with the Europeans dreaming of the exotic pleasures of Japan, and the Japanese would much rather have the fun they enjoy over in Europe. Throughout the centuries, however, there was a phenomenon so peculiar it even earned a special name: Orientalism. The Orient in question has little to do with geography. In fact, since the Middle Ages, it has been a generic elsewhere over which imagination projected everything and its opposite, even in the field of sex. Its indefinite borders spanned from Turkey to the Pacific Ocean and enclosed savages and refined civilizations, monsters and beauties, dangers and unimaginable pleasures. The men were at once brutes and knowing, the women cruel and submissive, depending on what better fit the tale. The actual erotic mythizations, however, began in the 14th and 15th century with narratives about Moorish pirates lurking on the Mediterranean Sea to kidnap innocent white seafarers and even assault their coasts to gather new slaves. The danger really existed, but of course it mostly concerned merchant seamen who were captured to labor on pirate ships. The tales repeated on land detailed instead very different scenarios, with women and young Christians of both genders dragged in chains through the streets of Barbary towns, where they were disrobed in front of everyone and humiliated, just the men, by forcibly shaving their beards and hair in an act recalling of the legend of Samson. Then they were put on sale like animals and subjected to untold abuses. Robert Davis, who analyzed these stories in his book Christian Slaves, Muslim Masters, collected ancient texts as used even by priests in their churches, but that today read like BDSM novels. The typical scene sees the Muslim slavers torture their victims to make them renounce Christian faith, and only then complete their degradation by forcing them to endure sodomy. In that age, the mythical capital of this practice was the city of Algiers, always presented in legendary terms. What made it even more perverse was how even its women penetrated white slaves, thus going doubly against nature. For the audience, this was morbid titillation. For the church instead, all of this was a tool for cruel morality plays that found their ultimate expression in the gathering of funds from the people to pay the ransom of a handful of prisoners. When they returned to their country, though, they essentially became property of the clergy, who forced them to star for years in the retelling of their misadventures in exaggerated processions, which easily costed 10 times the ransom itself, with the goal of reaffirming Christian justice and power over the people.
Let me interrupt you just a sec for an important reminder. The episode notes contain all the links to the topics mentioned in the podcast, and if you want to dig deeper, you will find hundreds of further articles on the Ayzad.com website.
Come the 19th century and the great colonial explorations, the fantasies about the mysterious Orient necessarily had to become a little more realistic, meaning that they now focused on the descriptions of what, theoretically, happened behind the closed doors of grand palaces. The most important name in this operation was that of Sir Richard Burton, an intellectual as much as a sex maniac. Besides translating and somehow romanticizing several Oriental erotic manuals, he was convinced of the existence of a so-called soteric zone, delimited by the tropics, where sex was unrestrained, uninhibited, continuous, and always bisexual. This is also the period of the myth of a harem, which to European eyes revolved around the figure of improbable white slave girls treated like precious treasures, differently from inferior black women. It didn't really matter if a few female travelers who actually had entered and visited the harems had came back praising the superior sexual freedom of the Arabian women and their fairer treatment compared to their own experience in London and Paris. The wholly imaginary paintings told a different story, and we know how a picture is worth 1,000 words. To support the narrative, even a whole land was invented, Circassia, populated by technically black but fair-skinned women. That was capitalized upon by Barnum, the inventor of the sideshow, who had punters pay a full ticket just to see a totally ordinary white American girl with her hair buffed up in an afro. The audience was happy enough. It would be nice to say that things got better with time, but the truth is that besides the pillaging, one of the big engines of colonialism was the prospect of rape supposedly inferior populations with impunity. Just think of the alleged Italian fascist undertakings to the conquest of the poorest of countries, but marching to the tune of songs like Faccetta Nera that openly talked about violating young black slaves. This is a still open wound in my own country, as proven during Women's Day 2019 by a protest against the memorial statue of journalism giant Montanelli, who died without ever regretting having had an Eritrean concubine of 12 he always called "my little animal." In today's global village, dreaming of faraway sexual paradises has become impossible, but certain archetypes are part of human nature. One of the most successful contemporary erotic sagas is that of Gore, composed by 34 books written by former philosophy professor John Norman. His secret? Setting the story of an unknown planet to which very lucky men can be transported almost by magic, where women are all devoted slaves and the world looks terribly like the one described by the storytellers of the 16th century.
The Sexual Explorers Manifesto is a global initiative to spread a healthier and more positive approach to sexuality. You can easily find it with an online search, but in the meantime, let's take a closer look at one of its 15 items. Today's one says:
Protecting health is fundamental. As we said in the previous episodes, any sexual activity must respect one's health and their partners. This means paying special attention to the well-being of mind and body, but more trivially, also to adopt safer sex measures to prevent possible sexually transmitted diseases. Given the dangerous consequences of such infections, it is everyone's responsibility to get an education and to educate about their characteristics, prevention, treatment, and about less risky alternative practices. Essential, above all, is to keep your health conditions monitored through complete and regular testing, as much as offering and insisting on recent certifications when you decide to enjoy sex involving any fluid exchange with new partners. Keeping healthy is a necessity and a mutual gift, but has no reason to cause any embarrassment.
This is your moment. In every episode, we pick one question among those sent to our expert at podcast@ayzad.com. So let's get writing to get an answer like this.
This time, Exploring Unusual Sex plays psychologist to answer Elena, who actually wrote a very long email I'm going to digest in one key question. Sometimes when the underground is packed, I get very aroused if I feel someone rubbing against me, even by accident, or groping me. Am I sick? The important preamble is to repeat the official criteria of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Diseases, according to which any behavior has to be treated only if it is distressing for the subject or the people around them. So, in this view, you can relax. On the other hand, I would recommend to be careful, because in that sort of situations you never know whether the other person is merely a frotteur, which is the technical name for those who rub onto unsuspecting people and such, or someone with more aggressive and dangerous intentions. Your paraphilia, however, has a name, aphephilia, indicating those who enjoy being touched by unaware people. It is typical of very isolated or shy persons, and it had its moment of glory in 1863 when the London Underground was inaugurated and many priests caught up in the passengers' crowd ended up having spontaneous orgasms. The aforementioned frotteurs used the excuse of crowded public transit too, but to compensate for a social distress hindering them from having a less creepy approach. In Japan, as usual, this even became a social plague called chicane, which is so widespread that many trains have women-only cars to prevent the issue in the first place. Pity then they became the ideal hunting ground for chijo, or female molesters. After solving this doubt too, I want to remind everyone that sex should always be a pleasure, not a problem, even when it is uncommon. However, if you are experiencing issues, I can help you as a personal coach to discover together the ideal strategy to win back your happiness in this field. You can get in touch through my website ayzad.com, spelled A-Y-Z-A-D, and saying you are a listener of this podcast will earn you a 20% discount on the first session.
This episode is almost over, but we still have time to read one entry from XXX, the Dictionary of Unusual Sex, available in online bookstores everywhere, but in Italian only for the moment.
Today's entry is dedicated to the Chevalier d'Eon, a French spy and diplomat who lived between 1728 and 1810, whose full name was definitely too long to be repeated here. The first part of his life was a succession of novelesque and probably romanticized missions around the world for King Louis XV. In his diaries, he tells of having often disguised himself as a woman to successfully infiltrate enemy courts, and his effeminate looks was in fact so pronounced that the London Exchange even held a colossal bet on his true gender. While the noble person had cunningly fostered the doubt during his years of exile in Great Britain, when the king died in 1774, he shocked the world by declaring he was actually female and raised by a family as a man. Therefore, he or she had a right to go back to France as a dame, which was granted on the condition of dressing and behaving as such, a thing the Chevalier found rather easy, also because the wardrobe was fully paid by the royal coffers. In the subsequent years, the lady proposed herself in various roles, including as the leader of an entirely female army division, always without success. When she died in relative disgrace in London, it was eventually established that the Chevalier had always been a man, possibly struck by a condition that had stopped his sexual development. Anyway, his name entered the history of transvestism, which, unsurprisingly, is also called Eonism after him. And that really was it. Before leaving you with one last unusual sex fact, I want to thank you for listening and invite you to follow me on my social networks and above all on my website, ayzad.com, which is also the ideal place to sign up for my newsletter. That way you'll get straight in your inbox new articles, reviews, invitations to events, and the notification for new podcast episodes which you can listen to and comment pretty much everywhere, like iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker, and so on. If you liked exploring unusual sex, I would also like to invite you to fill the Tell Me About You form you can find linked in the episode notes, so you will help me make the next episodes even better and closer to your tastes. Finally, you can also lend a hand by telling your friends about this podcast and writing about it on your social networks. Thanks, and before moving on to the next episode, here's the fact I promised you. In San Francisco, men get stuck in improvised cock rings so frequently that the fire department rescue squad has a specific call code for that.